Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about tiles, walking, and projection. And just off the top, let me just say I'm talking about 2D, because in 3D, when everything's a polygon, you can do whatever you want. You can choose whatever camera angle you want, you can let players do different angles. I'm talking about 2D games, how you pick how you want your tiles to work, which can be both the tiles that put down the terrain and then the tiles that you walk on, frequently different, usually different. I'll talk about that. And then what projection method you chose, isometric, trimetric. I'll get into that. This is coming from a question. A lot of people have asked me this question in a variety of ways. I've always put it off because I knew that I'd have to show some examples and my video editing skills are So the most recent person to ask was Lenart Breed, who asked, "Hi Tim, have you ever considered making a video about the different tile map projections used in your games? Isometric, trimetric, hexagons, etc. Why were they chosen and possibly how were they implemented? Thank you." Thank you. I will. You made me do it, and hopefully this will be useful. The way I want to do it is I want to talk first about how to do walking. This will be interesting to designers, artists, and programmers, because then that will lead into the different projection methods you can choose, and then how you want to tile the game for as opposed to what pathing method you choose versus the tile to lay down the terrain. I've pulled a lot of different art pieces from here and there in the net, and I will link them all below because I like giving credit to people. I didn't have any of this, so you're asked, where did you learn this? I learned this all in school. When you're in engineering school, you learn all the projections. When you are taking mechanical drawing, which I did not do well in because I have terrible handwriting, but I learned all about the stuff. It's why I incorrectly called Fallout Cavalier Oblique for years, because I needed to remember we were doing a parallel projection and not a perspective. In any case, I'll get into that. Let's talk walking first. In most Sprite-based games, because they were done earlier, you had to choose between 8 rotations and 6. These days, you could do sprites with way more rotations, 16, 32, because you've got the memory and the processor power to store it. But back in the 80s and 90s, it was pretty much, are you going to do an 8 rotation walk or a 6 rotation walk? The 8 rotation one was based on squares, because you basically walked in all the cardinal directions plus diagonal, like this. This is a really good example of what you can do, and this is 8 directions. There's up, down, left, right, and then all the diagonal directions. These are 2 more rotations you get if you go in hex walking, which I'll talk about in a second. The wonderful thing about choosing 8 directions is you will get smooth walking in all those directions, up and down, left and right, and all the diagonals. The downside is distance is very easy to calculate, up, down, and left, right, because if you make that 1 unit, great, it's 1 unit. But it's going to be harder to calculate that for the diagonal, because if they walk to the next square, assuming you're walking from center of one square to center of another square, the diagonals are like 1.4. They're the square root of 2. That is not a unit. And no matter what you make your unit, you're not going to make that into an integer like your north, south, left, right. This is described in this image, which shows basically the problem with calculating units for diagonals versus the cardinal directions. There's another advantage, so that's a disadvantage of doing 8 rotation walk. 8 rotation walk is very useful to use in what I call 45-45 projection. I'll talk about that when we get to projections below. So let's quickly look at the 6 rotation one. That's hexes. So already you have less rotations. You're going to have 6 rotations because you only can walk in 6 directions. You can either go, and depending on how you orient your hexes, you're going to be zigzaggy, either up, down, or left, right. So here's an example. And you can see that because they made the flat part of the hex point up and down, you can go perfectly up down. But if you try to go left right like the bottom line is doing, it will zigzag up and down. You can try to smooth it like it's showing in the one that's going up and to the right. There's a smoothed version of the line, but then you notice that it's going along edges and going a little bit into different hexes. If you try to smooth the walk in a hex gridded walking map, you are going to slightly move into other hexes, and then you're going to clip objects because you're not entirely in that other hex. You were supposed to path to the other hex, but it's showing you move through that one. You're going to clip things. Now, a huge advantage to hex is distance is really easy to calculate. In any direction you can go, 6 directions, it's 1 unit. This is why hexes are used for battle maps and in a lot of strategy games, because it's just easier to calculate distance. It's also very easy to use hexes if you're using what I call 30-60 projection, which again I'll talk about when we get below. Before I leave walking, I do want to talk about reflection. Reflection is something you use because since you have to store all these sprites in memory, frequently you can avoid storing every rotation. If we look back at the 8 walk again, you can see that the top walking up and walking down is its own image, walking right is its own image, but when you go to walk left, you can just reflect the right walk over, and it will look fine. Similarly, for the for the rightmost diagonals, one going up and one going down, you can just reflect those, do a mirror image reflection over to the left, and you have those sprites to go in that direction. This is awesome. This can save you a lot of memory. Instead of storing 8 sprites, you're only storing 5. Now, hex isn't quite as clean. It depends on how you orient it. If you do it with the flat edge pointing up, then you need 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can reflect the other 2. But if you do the pointy part up, then you can do 1, 2, 3 and reflect all of those. So hexes can be reflected either 4, 2 or 3, 3. If you go 3, 3, because we did the pointy part up in Fallout, we could have reflected in Fallout to save half the sprite memory. We ended up not doing that, but we did, when we went to 8 rotations in Arcanum, we did mirror the rotations because it just saved so much memory. If you're worried about people noticing reflection, many people think they will, and many people won't. There were a lot of games out there that did reflection that I read reviews, I looked at online stuff, and no one ever mentioned it. No one ever commented on it. And then years later, when they said, look, we reflected it, suddenly people were like, oh, I noticed that. Well, it didn't affect you buying it, didn't seem to affect sales. Nobody mentioned it in reviews. So if it was something people noticed, they didn't care about it, or at least they didn't vocally care about it. And all that memory that you saved by doing those reflections meant you could either fit more memory, more variety of sprites into memory, and there was less frame rate hitch caused by when you had to go out to disk to load those sprites because you could keep more stuff in memory. So there we go, 8 versus 6. Now let's talk about projection. Projection is interesting because it's hard to get this exactly right. There's a lot of math here. Most people call 2D non-top-down games, angled games, isometric. But most of them are not. They're really axonometric. What they all share in common is that they all use parallel projection instead of perspective projection, which means in perspective, things get smaller with distance. Parallel lines don't converge. In parallel projection, in parallel projection, things don't get smaller and the parallel lines don't converge. In perspective, they do. So obviously, because you want to just load one sprite and one wall segment and one tile, and it doesn't matter where you're going to put it on your screen, you want to do parallel projection. This looks okay because the angle is always picked so you can't see a horizon in that game. If you could see out to the horizon, it would look very strange that things were not shrinking in the distance. In fact, I'm not sure you can even do parallel projection and show a horizon. But let's walk through the 3 types, which I will show here. This is a very easy way of remembering isometric, dimetric, and trimetric. So the way this works, let me see if I can bring that up myself so I can look at it. So isometric is all three angles there are the same, 120 degrees. The three XYZ axis join at a visual 120 degrees. People think most things are done isometrically, but that angle there, the Z angle, most games don't do that. They do dimetric. Dimetric is two of the angles are the same, but the other one isn't. You can either go up or down. And they do that to show into buildings better. And I'll get into that. And then you have trimetric, where the three angles are different. Fallout was trimetric. I'll get into that. So isometric, like I said, is when all those three angles are the same. I have an image of all the of typical isometric. This is the reason I call it 30-30 is you can see that upper corner, all the angles that are going in there are 120. But if you look down at the bottom, the two walls hit the horizontal line with 30 degrees on both of those. This means that two of the angles are equally foreshortened. We did this in Arcanum. Oh, you know what? I just totally realized I said that wrong. That first one is isometric. Most people don't do this. You can see you can't see into that building very well. Most games are actually dimetric. So only two of them are foreshortened, and the third one are equally foreshortened, and the third one is different. Here's dimetric. This is Arcanum. You can see down into the building better, which is what we wanted. You can also see that where the walls hit the horizontal line are 45 degrees. A huge advantage of going dimetric is that works really well when you go to tile the game, because all of the tiles will have a nice foreshortening and you can lay them down equally, and then you can reflect them. That reflection, for the same reason you want to reflect sprites, you can reflect tiles and walls around the vertical axis, and you can show a lot more stuff. This is really, really common that people do this. Arcanum did it. You can see it here, and you can see that the walls that go up to the left and the walls that go up to the right, we could either swap those and just mirror image them back and forth and do wherever we want. Fallout was not done that way. Fallout was trimetric, like this one shows, where it was all of them were at different angles. There was a 60 degree on the leftmost and a 30 degree on the rightmost where it intersected the horizontal line, making the topmost corner was really 90 degrees, 120 degrees, 150 degrees. The reason we did this, it works really well for hexes. Hexes project into that world, the walking hex map. You can line it up really well with the angle, so you can get a rise run calculation where going over one unit goes up exactly 1/2. Really easy to calculate 1/2 on even older computers. You can just do a bit shift. So it's very, to calculate divide by 2. So it's very easy and fast to do this. You can't really do the wall reflection because this wall angles differently than this wall. This isn't as common for games to use because most of them don't use hex walking. They don't use 6 directions, they use 8. So they tend to use the 45-45 dimetric. However, because it's less common, people sometimes are attracted to trimetric games and they don't know why. They can't put their finger on it. They're just like, they're more comfortable looking at it. It might just be because less reflection is being used that there's more variety. I don't know what it is, but for the longest time, people liked the look of Fallout more than, say, Baldur's Gate and didn't know why, and they attributed it to art style or lighting or color palette. I think a lot of it was just trimetric is just visually more interesting to your eyeball than dimetric, with all other things being the same. But of course, they weren't the same. Real quick, I'll talk about tiles. So regardless of your walk choice, your tiles will be based on your projection. Isometric and dimetric can be reflected, trimetric not so much. So deciding how you want to tile may inform how you want to do projection and vice versa. Square versus hex can determine determine where you want to put doors and hallways, because you want the character to path through the middle of a door and tend to walk up the middle of hallways. So this just to avoid clipping and things like that. So if you are going to use 8 direction walking squares, I'd go dimetric. If you were going to do 60-30 trimetric projection, I'd go hexes. What you want to use is going to depend on how you want it to look, how you want to make your sprites, how you want to do your calculations on moving sprites. These all vary, but you can see that it is a combination of factors. It's what do your designers want? What are your artists comfortable doing? And what do your programmers know how to do? I think mixing all that together, it's hard to just go, dimetric 8 direction walking is the way to go. It's not always, but it's the most common. And it's just because between the reflection and it's easier to conceive and code and do all that stuff. And the only problem is the diagonal distance calculation. A lot of people just go dimetric, but it's up for you to decide what to do. And I hope, Lennart Breed, this answered all your questions.